book of Daniel.
Last week. Yeah, I wasn't there, yes. Yeah, on our main page, it should be like also around 3. Okay. You should be able to get to the live video sometime. Okay.
All right. Well, I can't find Jan, so she normally stays and isn't here. Do you have trouble reading?
Yes. Well, I had both open by what I can see, and this eye, reading fine. This eye is damaged up. Yeah.
Because we are going to, we're going to be doing Bible study on this.
I have a little magnifying glass.
So, yeah. But I don't know. And I didn't realize that I needed to make one for that big print, which I wouldn't have done on that.
For this, or any of that, or?
It's just a diamond video.
Okay.
So like
Yes. I don't know where they are today.
Well, if we ever actually get to it, then I'll be done.
Yeah, there you go. Hold on to it. That way.
The first week of it is actually a 5-part series, so I'm thinking the rest of the semester here. We'll see. Well, might as well just watch the video. Here. So you have to tell me your name again. Okay, Charlie, this help? Okay. Okay, so this is this thing called the Bible Project. It's free. You can go online and download it for free. And it has this, there's a read through the Bible thing where you can read the passages and download them. Or there's this little video series where there's a video on each book. So this one is the book of Daniel, and there's a 9-minute video, and it's an overview of the book. Now, when Pastor was last here, she talked a little bit about the structure of Old Testament writings. It was a month ago, how there were certain ways that the structure, like what was at the beginning, reflected what was at the end, and there were different structural tools that were part of the story. So they're going to go over one of the structural tools in Daniel, and we'll watch the video, and then Suzanne should be here, and we'll get started. Okay, Doug.
The book of Daniel. The story is set right after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were 4 men from the royal family of David: Daniel, who's later named Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends, who you probably know by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells of their struggles to maintain hope in the land of their conquerors. The book's design seems pretty simple at first. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends in Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the visions of Daniel about the future. But this 2-part shape is made even more interesting by another design feature, and that's the book's language. It begins in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, a cousin language to Hebrew spoken widely among the ancient empires. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back to Hebrew. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are a coherent section, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 for understanding So the friends are persecuted. They're thrown into a fiery furnace. But God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God as the true one. After this come a pair of stories about two Babylonian kings, the father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, Belshazzar. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power. And so, like in chapter 2, God warns them both through dreams and then visions, which, also like chapter 2, only Daniel can interpret. He says that both kings are to humble themselves before God, and both kings arrogantly resist. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with madness. He becomes like a beast in the field. But then he humbles himself before God, and his humanity returns to him. He's restored as king. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself before God, and he's assassinated that very night. Now, these two stories draw this imagery from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, where humans are depicted as the royal image of God. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the world's true king. But when human kingdoms forget that, when they rebel and make themselves and their power into a god, they become less than human, like violent beasts who will face God's justice. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapter 3. And this time it's Daniel who's being persecuted, because he refuses to pray and worship the king as a god. And so like the friends, he's sentenced to death and he's thrown into a lion's den. But God delivers him from the beasts, and like the friends, the king exalts Daniel and praises his God, which brings us to chapter 7. It's the pair of chapter 2, and the center of the book where all its themes come together. It's another dream, but it's Daniel's this time. And ironically, he can't understand the dream until an angelic messenger explains it to him. He sees a series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, then one like a winged leopard, each of these symbolizing an arrogant kingdom. And last of all is a super beast, identified as a really evil empire. And it has lots of horns, a common symbol for kings in the Old Testament. And there's one specific horn who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and persecutes God's people. Now they are symbolized by a figure called the Son of Man, who's an image for both God's covenant people, but also for their king from the line of David. But then all of a sudden, God, who's called the Ancient of Days, comes and he sets up his throne. He destroys the super beast and he exalts the Son of Man on the clouds, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand and share in God's rule over the nations. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first half fit together. The 3 stories of faithfulness despite persecution. These are meant to offer hope to God's suffering people among the nations. But they suffer because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and have become beasts. And so these visions encourage patience, that God's people are to wait for him to bring his kingdom and rule over our world and vindicate his suffering people. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that, and that's what these final 3 visions set out to explore. In chapter 8, Daniel has another vision about the final 2 beasts of chapter 7, but this time they're symbolized by a ram, who we're told is the image of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and then by a goat, who's an image of ancient Greece. And out of the goat come a whole bunch of horns, one of which symbolizes the evil king from chapter 7. And we're told more about him, that he will attack Jerusalem and exalt himself above God and defile the temple with idols. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God, who will exalt his people in his kingdom. Now by chapter 9, Daniel is very puzzled, especially as to when all of this is going to take place. And so he consults the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah, where God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. So for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. And so he asks God to fulfill his promise soon. But an angel comes and informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion has continued. And so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than Jeremiah envisioned. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this, and he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think like it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that in a sense, they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus' empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings in their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong, and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.
You and I have seen it twice, and I have seen it 4 times. So it's beat into my brain and maybe into yours. Now, what we were going to do last week and finish this week is a deep dive into chapter 1 of Daniel. So we'll do a deep dive into the first half of chapter 1 of Daniel, and presumably at the end of next month, we'll do the second half of the first chapter, although I don't know what Pastor Gretchen has planned for Lent. She may have some kind of series planned. So when you get yours, put your name on it, because I'm going to collect them so we have them next week. There are 5 pages worth of stuff. I printed them all up at once. We'll start it, and then when you turn it back in, I'll have it. I won't read any of your notes, but so if you have a pencil or a pen or a crayon or whatever you have, put your name on it. There you go. So, first things first. So this thing is called a manuscript because it is the actual text of the Bible. This happens to be the New International Version, which is my favorite. That's why it's what we're using. But it is printed without any verse numbers, chapter numbers, sections, titles, anything. It's just the actual text. The point of that is twofold. One, we're not influenced by what somebody else thinks a particular section is about. And 2, then you can write all over it. Different people do different things. I like to circle and draw lines between similar ideas, but it's yours. You can write all over it. So I'm going to read out the first page, and when we refer to things, we'll just say the line number. The line numbers are going down the left-hand side. They aren't verses. They're just the lines here. And I'm going to go down to 17. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave these new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. Thank you. What was wrong with Daniel? To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now, a little bit of background. This was at about the year 600 BC, which was approximately the time when Jeremiah was doing his prophet stuff. At this point in time, Israel was sort of a vassal state to Egypt, and so Judah was actually paying taxes to Egypt. Well, this king, Jehoiakim, he had to find money. So then he taxed the people of Judah so he could pay to Egypt. Well, meanwhile, this weakened Judah, and along comes Nebuchadnezzar, who's off to the east in Babylon, zooms on in and conquers Judah. So this was at a time when Judah was kind of weak anyway, and then they were captured by the Babylonians. And by the way, Jehoiakim was not a very godly man. His dad had been, but not him. He just completely disregarded all of the laws of Israel. So this was a pretty bad scene. So this is what you're going to do. I'll give you 10 minutes. Then we'll have 15 minutes to talk about it. I want you to look at this and just write all over it. Well, what are you looking for? Well, maybe one thing, you could list the names of all of the people who are involved. Make a list on the left-hand side. Maybe you could look for some things that are repeated. Circle them, draw a line between them. Connect things, see what you find. Maybe you can look for some things that seem to not tie into what was said beforehand. So just read it, immerse yourself for 10 minutes, which is going to seem very long, but once you get into it, it's not that long. And, oh, see, now the council president's here. I don't know if I can say this, but if you take your worship book, you can use it as a little desk, or, see, this is what you can't hear. If you fold it in half and break its spine, you can make a bigger desk. But either way, use it as a little desk and get going. I'll gather us in 10. Maybe I'll give you 5, and then I'll let you get together in 5 more. working independently. I'm going to put your name on it because I'm going to collect them. Because the next time we use it, then I'll have yours here ready to go. And everyone's almost done with 5 minutes of study, so you can just read down the first page and then jump in. So you've had 5 minutes. Do you want a few more? You ready to roll? You're supposed to stay on page 1, Charlie. Page 1. You don't listen. I'm using the microphone, and you still don't hear. And that's, hey, just like my high schoolers used to be. I didn't hear you. Okay, so we're on page 1. So, and just yell it out. You don't have to be brilliant. All you have to do is be able to see it, and, oh, it's there. So, what do you see? Doug, what's something you've noticed?
In terms of the story,
Sure, anything.
well, I wrote all my characters down, so I got that on the side here. It was interesting that the king was assigning food in the line and how many years of service and all that. But then later, Daniel was asking the chief for permission, not the king. So it was an odd communication chain.
Which is showing us something about what the society was like at the time, but good observation. Okay, anybody else want to jump in with anything?
You're on page 1.
Yes, sir.
Okay, down near the bottom, I think that caught my attention, that God is taking care of them because his own, so to speak. That it says, now God has caused the official to show favor and sympathy with Daniel. So he was able to find the Lord helping him through this ordeal.
Suzanne, you only had a chance to zip through once, but did anything strike you? Yes, they get into the furnace. Which apparently at the time it was very common, like when immigrants came into our country and their name was Slopopopovich, and they said, let's just call you Al, because that's an American name. So this sounds queer to us, but we've done it at times. Although, I don't know, calling Daniel Belteshazzar seems like a bit of a mouthful. Some of them did. So that was a cultural thing. Now, Doug said he listed down all of the people involved. What were the different roles that these people have? One of them was? Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 And what was special about Daniel and his 3 friends? How did they end up here? So what was the king up to? I think they were good looking, and they were literate, able to learn. And they were from the kingdom of Judah. And the king of Babylon What was his plan for these characters? And we'll find out later, as Suzanne said, what happened to a couple of them when the king's diabolical plan did not work. Oh, yeah. So you're an overachiever. You read ahead, huh? That's okay. We'll get to that if we keep this up. Now, what was Daniel offered that he turned down? Food and wine. Good food and wine. What were they, we don't know, but what might they have been eating when they were in captivity? Not pork. Well, like, but when they were overtaken, what might have been a normal, I mean, we're guessing here, but what might have been a normal food for them to eat? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they realized, oh, that's available here, or certainly some kind of meat. So why didn't they want to eat the king's food and drink the king's wine? And now we're starting to speculate a little bit, but they said, no, give us vegetables and water. Now, first of all, if you had a choice between the king's food and the king's wine and vegetables and water, I don't know about you, but I'd go for the king's food and the king's wine. So it might have been some kind of a offense to their laws to eat some of this stuff. Mm. Mm-hmm. And what else? You know how when you go to like a church dinner and someone says, hey, I made this, have a little bit. And you say, okay, when you eat the food that someone gives you, what are you actually doing besides just eating food? Yes. Did it taste good? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of inching a little bit onto their page, or as Suzanne said, you're trusting them. If that was in the back of Daniel's mind, why might he not have wanted to trust anything the king of Babylon said? This is all speculation, which once we've read it, we can think about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. enemies from way back, they find themselves stuck in this situation. If you found yourself stuck in a situation and they're trying to get you to go along with them, what might you do? Could. Exactly, you come out eating it. But see, but Daniel approached it, so what did he do? He went to the chief official and said, hey, give me vegetables and water. We'll eat this for 3 days. And I think it's in that first part. Yeah, he asked for permission not to defile himself with this food. So the servant's stuck. Am I going to go get these vegetables and water, or am I going to make him eat these things? Well, that's in page 2. So now let's pull it all together. We're setting the stage here for what's going to happen in the next page and for what might have been going through everybody's mind. Now, what do you think might have been going through Daniel's mind at this point? Take a look at line 16 there. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself. What do you, when you resolve and you don't want to defile yourself, what do those words bring to mind? Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
So it's a conflict going on. Think about it. He's trying to make sure this person makes the right thing. He figures, well, if I go with what I believe in, I'll take whatever happens and move on. You know, if I get killed, I get killed. Or in prison or whatever. But he's not going to go against his thinking. This is what he believes in.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, now we're gonna, we've got 5 more minutes. I'm not sure when we're gonna pick up with this again, but we're sitting here perched on the edge of this little bit. Now, what questions are in your mind, if you haven't read it, about what's coming up? It's the first half of the first chapter. If you want, you can go home and finish reading the chapter. What are you thinking? We're perched at this spot. What are you wondering? Mm-hmm. He's got himself in a pickle there. Yes? So we're going to see, going to stay faithful? How long is he going to have to do that? How much is he going to accommodate? What are his 3 friends going to do? They're just hanging out being 3 friends at this point. What are they going to do? What are they going to say about it? How is he going to get them involved? So the plot thickens. So we're going to stop here. A couple of questions of mine. What's coming up? And as I said, this is just an opportunity to read the Bible, write on your text, come up with some new observations, things you haven't seen, questions that occurred to you, and wait and see what's coming next. So I'll collect them. I don't know. We may be doing this at the end of each month for the next 3 months, or Pastor may have something else. I'm not quite sure what she's up to. I'm not sure she knows what she's up to.